Hey, this is James, and in this video, I'll be talking about my personal brand of woo-woo and sharing a deck I recently created. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining me for this viewer-requested video. If this is your first time here, I'd like to say welcome, and if you're a returning visitor, I'd like to say welcome back. This video is a request from one of my viewers, Natasha. So Natasha, if you're watching this is for you in part. So Natasha and I had a conversation several weeks ago. What happened was I was cat sitting / house sitting for a couple of friends of mine who were on a cruise, and over the course of that time I had mentioned in one of my Oracle Outlook weekly videos that someone had asked me about a video series project, and it concerned tarot, and I was kind of mulling over as to whether or not I wanted to actually do that, because it was just going to be very exhaustive in terms of how long it was going to take to cover all 78 cards, because the person asked me if I would cover them in the ways that I had done with Lenormand, Kipper, and playing cards previously. So I was thinking about that, but in my mind I was just thinking about how long and exhaustive that particular request would be to fulfill. And as I had mentioned that, Natasha asked me if I would be willing to talk a little bit about my woo-woo. My woo-woo comes out every now and again when I'm doing my card readings. And when I define woo-woo for me is when I'm talking about the more spiritual aspects of my belief system, or the more metaphysical concepts that have become a big part of my life and my practice, right? So that's what I mean by woo-woo for me. And so Natasha asked me if I would be willing to elaborate on some of those things at some point in time. And so I was really intrigued by the prospect of getting to talk about my personal brand of woo-woo, because I really don't get to do that very often, or I should say, more precisely, is I probably choose not to do it so often in this space. So when someone asked me, I was like, wow, somebody's really interested in hearing more about that side of my being. So I was all on board. So I was thinking, what did I want to talk about as my first video in this kind of, I guess, vloggy kind of series, right? What did I want to talk about? Where did I want to start? And I thought the best place to start is where I'm at right now, currently. So currently, right now, I am exploring a resurgence of angels. A few years ago, I really became immersed in angels. Now, I have always had an affinity or a like or an interest in angels, always. But over the last few years, that kind of waned, and it's always interesting because those particular metaphysical topics are always tied to cards in some way. So what happened was that in 2015, so it was at the end of 2015 going into 2016, I had a dream. So if you're no stranger to me sharing about my personal life in any shape, form, or fashion, you'll know that a lot of the things that I experience in life always have had a dream kind of come before it. And this particular case is no exception to the rule. So in 2015, it was December of 2015 actually, I had a dream in which I was reading angel cards. So now I need to kind of set the stage here. At that point in my card reading journey, I was more proficient in tarot, and I had just started dabbling into Lenormand. So angel cards were not a thing on my radar. But in this particular dream, I was reading angel cards, and I was reading angel cards for another person. So I woke up from the dream, and I really took note of the dream, because anytime cards show up in a dream, I know it's signaling something. I may not know where it's going to go, but I know it's signaling something. So I woke up from the dream and I thought, okay, I'm getting dream guidance about angel cards. And I thought, angel cards are so interesting because I had never kind of considered angel cards in any shape, form, or fashion up to this point. So I gave it some thought, and what happened was, angels followed up with a sign. right? So I'm all about looking for a sign, right? So I'm always one of these people who likes to look for a sign to validate or confirm what it is that I'm kind of mulling over in my head. So I didn't have to wait too long. So what happened was, a little later in the morning, the same morning I had the dream, I reached for my phone to check my email. So I happen to be a Hay House subscriber, so I get their newsletter. And so on that particular day, I received an email newsletter, just like any other time, and I opened it up. And in that particular email newsletter, they were selling their certified angel card reader course at 50% off. Now, mind you, this is the same morning I had this dream, so I'm thinking like, oh, the universe is really speaking to me about this. And so what happened was, I said, this is interesting. I still had to mull it over. So what I did was, I grabbed my trusty tarot cards and I did a reading asking, is this the time that I'm supposed to be exploring angel card reading? And as I'm talking about this story, my head is tingling. So that's what's known for me. I have now known what that sensation is called. There's actually a term for it. It's called crown chakra tingles. And so for me, that usually represents that, I'm onto something here. So, but I love that it's validating me recounting the story, right? So I said, okay. So I asked the cards, and the reading was amazing. There was no doubt in my mind after it. And the one card I remember, because I still write my readings down to this day by hand in my journal, but one card that's coming to me in the moment right now as I'm recounting the story is the Magician card. So for me, the Magician card can usually represent, learning some kind of skill. Sometimes it's manual dexterity, working with your hands, right? And as a card reader, I'm always working with my hands. But it could also represent, some type of expertise, or that you're going to be dabbling into something new, right? And it could create the space for some kind of expertise. It's usually a card for me that talks about one's talent, skill, and ability, right? But whenever the Magician card shows up in a reading, I know it's a personal nod to me because I'm also self-employed. That's another one of my meanings for it. And as I'm talking about it now, another meaning for the Magician for me can represent channeling. So now, the interesting thing about the Magician card is that, and I'm talking about the version from the Rider-Waite-Smith variety. So in that one, I have now languaged that in terms of angelology. So for me, the depiction of the Magician is Archangel Metatron, who I have a deep affinity for, and so I'll talk more about that throughout this video. So for me, the Magician represents Metatron, and then the table with the 4 representations of the minor arcana, which is known as also the 4 elements, the 4 suits of the minor arcana. Each one of those represents a particular angel. So for instance, there's wands. So for me, wands represents Archangel Gabriel. So all the wands cards, if I read the tarot just solely from an angel perspective, the suit of wands represents Gabriel. Then there's the suit of cups. The suit of cups represents Archangel Raphael. The suit of swords represents Archangel Michael, of course, because Archangel Michael is always depicted carrying a sword, his sword of either fire or of light. And then the suit of pentacles is either attributed to Uriel or Ariel, depending on which way you fall or what tradition of angelology that you want to subscribe to, right? So that is when I think of the Magician, I think of Metatron, and then Metatron oversees all the other angels, right? And that just comes from my study of the 72 angels, right? When I became aware of that, that's known as the traditional study of angels, right? So that's where that all comes from. That's just my personal tradition that I subscribe to. So, after I did that reading, I invested in the course. And here's what happened to validate that, because I just said I'm always looking for some sort of external validation or confirmation, right? So what happened was, in the entire month of December, the rest of the month, after that initial dream, I continually had dreams about reading angel cards for other people. It was always the same thing. I was always reading the cards for someone else, right? So the course was actually like 6 weeks long, I believe, and so by the time I was done, so this is now early January, I finished the course, and then I became certified. And so I thought, okay, So the angels through the dreaming, I felt was signaling that I was going to be reading angel cards for other people. So I started doing that, right? I put my shingle out there, so to speak, and said I was going to be offering angel card readings, I should say. And then an interesting thing happened. No one seemed interested. And I thought, this is very interesting. Like, no one seemed interested in getting an angel card reading from me. And so I thought, okay. After a while, I just said, okay, I kind of put that aside. And then something else took its space. When you create space for something, the universe doesn't like space. It always fills the space up with something else. So I kind of created the space, and then something else filled it. And I believed it was like maybe Kipper at this point, right? So, and I kind of just moved on. And what I have now learned is that for me, that it wasn't really about doing angel card readings for other people. The angels are very wise in how they deliver messages, at least to me. They knew enough that if they showed me reading cards, I was going to be all in, right? Because I believe that I am hardwired to read cards. I believe cards and card reading is in my DNA. It's the best way I can put it, because I eat it, sleep it, breathe it. I mean, I just can't imagine my life without cards in it. So, they were wise in their wisdom in giving it to me that way, because they knew I would be all in. And they told me, and when I say told me, it's not like I can hear angels speaking to me, right? It's not like that. What it is I get an inspired thought that I know is not my own thought, because the way it's delivered to me is not the way that I might think. Right? So that's what I mean by the angels told me. Usually I get what I call a download, so a thought just comes into my head. So the thought that came into my head as I was pondering, like, well, okay, so what was even the point of even learning how to read these angel cards? What was the point? And they said to me that it was more about establishing a relationship and a connection to them, and that was the way that I was going to do it, because they knew I would do it that way. Aren't they amazing? So, what happened was I kind of just moved on from the angel cards, and I would dabble with them every now and again for myself. I'd pull a deck off the shelf, spend a little time with it, and then, somehow put it back up. But at the top of this year, in January 2020, I felt this really intense resurgence into getting back into my angel cards. And so, having learned from history, I didn't think that anybody would be interested, so I kind of just was doing it for myself. I just felt like, okay, I want to move in this direction. And then I wanted to know what deck would be the deck that would be my go-to deck in terms of angel cards, because I have a number of angel card decks. And what happened was a sign. I went to a friend's house, and she wanted to gift me a deck of angel cards that she had received from a mutual friend. And so she said, they're over there on the table, so she pointed to the table, and I turned to look. And it was Kyle Gray's Angel Prayers Oracle cards. It was his first angel card deck. And I already have it. So I turned to her and I said, oh, that's interesting. I already have that deck. And the minute that I said I already have it, the angels piped in and said, that's the deck we want you to work with. And I said, okay. So she pulled out the deck, because she had this thing about representation. And if you're a card reader, especially in the tarot community, representation is actually a very big topic right now. People, and that's whether creators or readers, are wanting to see more of themselves reflected in decks. And so, when my friend and I were talking about the angel cards, she said that she felt like there was no representation for her when it came to angel cards, so she was not interested, which is why she wanted to gift them to me. But the beautiful thing about Kyle Gray's Angel Prayers deck is that Kyle Gray has a very multicultural approach or perspective. So I had to show her. So what I did was I pulled out all the Archangel cards. There's 16 in the deck. So I pulled out all the Archangel cards and I showed her. So they're like all different cultures, races, ethnicities amongst these 16 cards. It's a beautiful thing. And as I'm laying out the cards and talking to her about these cards, I became more interested in wanting to work with this deck. So I got home, and I did a reading on, I want to make sure I got the sign right. So did I get the sign right about reading these particular cards? Is this going to be the deck that I'm going to be working with? And so I wrote it up as a blog post, so what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description box below, so if you want to check out that reading, because that's the only way I have shared it with the public is in this blog post. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave that in the description box below. And so Kyle Gray's Angel deck got me back into reading angel cards and forming a more close and intense connection with the angels. And so then what happened is that after Natasha asked me about talking about my woo-woo, another interesting thing happened. So now I'm moving from January, the top of the year, and now we're in end of February going into March. And then I all of a sudden had some inspiration to create my own set of cards. And so this is how that happened. So one day, I'm minding my own business. I'm just going about my business like I always do. And one of the things that I do is that I share a daily post called the Daily Divination, and I share it across all social media platforms. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So those are the 4 platforms that I share this daily post on. And so I'll never forget the day. It was March 11th. And so I happened to check later on in the day after I posted that particular daily divination. And I remember the card. The card was from the Starseed Oracle by Rebecca Campbell and Danielle Noel. So that was the card. And I believe the card was called Water Your Garden, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, so I don't want to digress because it's really not about the card. But when I was checking comments later on, because I like to stay engaged with people, I saw this comment. And the comment said, "When are you going to make your oracle cards? Question mark, question mark, question mark, at James Himm." At James Himm is my handle on Instagram. And so now I've gotten this question before over the now 21 years that I've been a card reader. So when I would get that question in the past, I would go, "Oh, you know, I'm just really not feeling like there's a deck in me. You know, I'm not really feeling inspired to create a deck." That was how it started. And then it was like, I don't know what the theme or the concept of the deck would be. So it moved from that to that position. And then the longest time I've held on to a particular answer or reply was this one. So I would say, "Oh, you know, I could just imagine how long it's going to take." So that would be the story, because I would just start thinking about, like, especially people were asking me about tarot decks. I'm thinking there's 78 cards. Do you know how long it's going to take me to create 78 cards? You know, with my life and all the things that are going on in it, I just couldn't see it. So I started off with that story to the person who made the question on Instagram. I said to her that I thought about making a deck on and off over the years. I'm not sure what the theme would be. You know, I don't have any kind of cohesive theme or a concept that, you know, I could use to kind of bring all the cards together. And I kind of just left that as, but I did thank her for, you know, giving me, you know, an idea to think about, giving me something to think about. And I said, who knows? I might get inspired. Well, I didn't have to wait too long for the inspiration to come. I mean, literally, just like a couple of hours later, I was just thinking about it. And all of a sudden, I thought, if I'm going to make a deck, what could I talk about? And then all these ideas started coming to me. Remember I talked about those spiritual and metaphysical concepts, right, at the beginning? So I grabbed a legal pad and a pen, and I just started writing down, like, what are all the things that have shaped my spiritual path or spiritual journey, my metaphysical experiences, or in this particular case, because I'm talking about it, my personal brand of woo-woo. What has shaped me? What has helped me become me? So I started writing everything down that I could think of. By the time I had stopped, I had a list of like 47 things that I could create a card for. Each one was a card that I could create. And so I was inspired. And so I thought, well, what would I call the deck? And so my working title in that moment was called the Himm Oracle, right? And Himm is my middle name. So I thought, I like the name, I like the working title now. And so then what happened was, shortly after that, I started thinking about, like, how was I going to present this? What was I going to do? And I started thinking that I would draw the imagery myself. I would do all the artwork. Because in my former life, before I became a card reader, I wanted to be a superhero comic book artist. right? So that was going to be my claim to fame when I was in my late teens, early 20s, right? And then what happened was I lived in New Jersey at the time where that was my big passion. And then I moved from New Jersey to South Carolina where I am now and have been ever since. And the interesting thing is that that passion for the comic book work just kind of just slowly faded away. And I really haven't drawn anything in a very, very long time. So I was sitting with my sketch pad and I was drawing images of what I think Archangel's Metatron and his twin Sandalphon would look like. Now remember I said I had a personal affinity for Metatron, right? So I'm doodling, and then all of a sudden my story came in. And the story was about how long it would take to create a deck doing my own artwork. And so I started thinking about the story, right? I'm thinking like, oh, this is going to take a really long time to get a deck done if I do my own artwork. And then, because I'm a life coach, I have now languaged it as my inner coach. When I'm coaching myself, it's my inner coach. If we go with the woo-woo that I'm talking about, it would probably be my higher self or my wiser self, right? But anyway, I called it my inner coach. So my inner coach suddenly stepped in and said, are you going to run this story again? And I paused. And I considered that. And I became aware that that was the story, right? That was the story that was keeping me from making a deck of cards all this time. And then my inner coach said further, if you're not willing to do your own artwork because you feel or think that it's going to be very daunting, what would you be willing to do in its place? And I said to myself, I would be willing to look for photographic imagery that would fit the concepts of each of the cards. So I did that. And it was very surprising to find that within a course of 5 days, I had all the imagery for the cards. I was really inspired. And here's the interesting thing. So the other interesting thing about that is that all took place during a Mercury retrograde, right? And one of the things that I have learned during a Mercury retrograde, is that one of the things they tell you is not to initiate new things or new projects, right? And here I was embroiled in this new project, one that I couldn't stop thinking about every spare moment that I could get. I was at my computer looking for imagery or, tweaking the images that I did find, modifying them, all those kinds of things to fit the concept that I was envisioning in my mind for the cards. All of that was taking place, and then we are now in this collective experience with the coronavirus, and people are social distancing themselves, people are sequestering themselves, and I thought this is an interesting time to feel really creative. And I think it was the universe's way, or the angel's way, of keeping me focused on something so I wouldn't run off into any possible fear thinking or panic thinking or anything like that. So I had something to kind of distract me. It was a very pleasant distraction, but I had something to distract me, right? To keep me, focused away from what was going on in the collective, right? And I think it was just an angelic coping mechanism. And I'm saying that because the deck is inspired by my connection with Archangel Metatron, and Archangel Metatron informed me that it's also a connection to Archangel Sandalphon. So those two angels in particular are heavily influenced in this deck, right? And here's why for me. For me, if you know this story behind Metatron and Sandalphon, you will know that they were the prophets Enoch and Elijah. And what happened is that they were transformed into angels, right? So one of the things that I like about these two particular angels is that they understand the human condition, right? If you are familiar with angels, angels typically aren't human, right? They've never been human. They've never incarnated as human, except for these two, right? So angels, when they're offering messages and guidance and inspiration and instruction, whatever you want to call that, they're always offering it from a higher perspective, right? They want us to raise our vibrational frequency, to raise our perspective. At least this is how I see it, right? Because I'm also a big believer in every person is going to have a different experience with angels that's going to be unique to them, right? We're all having our own personal. So whenever I'm sharing, it's just from my own personal experience, right? So in my own personal experience, I believe that when angels are offering messages of guidance, inspiration, support, kinds of things, they're doing it with the intention of, this is how we see the situation, right? They're always wanting us to raise our perspective, to kind of see things from a higher point of view, right? That's what I believe. But the interesting thing about Metatron and Sandalphon, like I've said, is that they understand the human condition. So when I feel like I'm getting inspiration or guidance from Metatron, excuse me, or Sandalphon, that was me connecting their names together. That's an interesting thing. I believe is that they're doing it with the intention that they know where I'm coming from. They understand what I'm going through because they've been there in a way, right? So those two archangels heavily influence the deck. So it is an angel deck. So I'm very excited about it. So where I am in the process with that, so I finished the deck in like 5 days. And then I went to make playing cards, and I uploaded the images, and I have had a test copy delivered to me. So I've been sharing up to this point the digital version of the cards, right? And so of course I had to modify them to fit the template offered by Make Playing Cards. And they did a great job. I just got the deck in the mail yesterday, right? So I'm filming this a day later, and I'm so excited. So I'm going to be making some tweaks and modifications to the cards, but Make Playing Cards, he did an awesome job. I mean, I heard about the cardstock, and so of course I went with Make Playing Cards, because if you know my history, then you know that I got into card reading, generally speaking, by having a dream about reading my own playing cards. Now, at the time I had a dream, I had never done that in waking life, so I knew that was another significant dream. So it just felt right to do business with Make Playing Cards, because it was just a nice nod, nudge, nudge, wink, wink from the universe, because that's how I got started, right? And so the cardstock is great. It's just like playing cardstock. It's just amazing. But the production quality of the cards is just amazing. I am now a raving fan of Make Playing Cards. I will talk about them anytime I can. When it comes to people who are interested in making their own cards, they are phenomenal. So they have created a raving fan. And so I got the test copy yesterday, and so I'm going to be making some tweaks and modifications for my final iteration of the deck. And so I'm talking about the final iteration. So one of the things I was led to do was to change the name. So I had talked about it being the Himm Oracle, and now the title that I was given by my angels, by the way, is the Oracle of Himm. And so when I was given the title, I said to myself, ooh, that sounds so grand. And I felt like I had to step into that. So that was a nice exercise about stepping into that. But the reason why I love the name now is because the deck is very personal to me, right? It talks about all the things that I have experienced in the way that I have experienced them, right? And so it just seems fitting to call it the Oracle of Himm. It's like if I was going to write a book, you know, it would be an autobiography or a spiritual memoir, right? If it was in book form. But the cards are like that. It's just in card form, right? It's still telling the story of my personal journey. It's just in the form of cards, right? So it just, the title just seems so fitting now, where I had to kind of get used to that because it just seems so grand, right? So that's where I'm at with the deck. So going from here, I thought it would be probably better for Natasha, who asked for me to talk about my woo-woo, if I would talk about certain things as I'm going through the cards. So now we're going to move closer to the table, and I'm going to share the cards from this point forward. And I will be sharing aspects of possibly what the card means to me, or maybe a story about it, or a personal concept that I've gone through. So now, let's do that now. And here we are at the table with my deck on hand. And so, remember, the name of the deck is the Oracle of Himm. And so I'm starting off by showing you the card backs. So the card backs consist of an image of angel wings with the 7 chakras going vertically down the column in between the angel wings. So I love that because it's a personal nod to me. When I first had my angelic experience, or I should say my first angelic experience, it was in a dream, of course. And in the dream, the angels presented themselves as beams of light, and each light was a different color. So when I found this image, I really loved it, and I thought it would make a wonderful card back. And so now, as I talk about the images, I want to say that the images that I found were from online resources that display or sell stock photos or stock imagery. So the sources for these images came from pixabay.com. That's my go-to source for royalty-free images, is Pixabay. Then there was Pexels, and then there was Unsplash, and then there was Shutterstock, and then some were vector imagery from different sites that sell vectors. So again, all of the images I found through royalty-free sites online. Okay, so again, these are the card backs, so I'm going to start turning them over one by one, and I'm going to maybe offer some brief thoughts on cards as I feel led and guided. If you are feeling like you'd like for me to expound or elaborate on a particular card, just let me know in the comments below, and I will take that under consideration for a future video. So let's take a look at the Oracle of Himm. So the first card is the affirmations card, and so what it is that I have an image, and then I have a keyword at the bottom, or a title, I should say. It's probably not a keyword, more like a title of the card. And so affirmations is a card for me that talks about the spiritual tool of affirmations, actually using affirmations. I'm a big fan of affirmations. But the secondary meaning of the card for me talks about the power of our words, right? There's a saying in Christian scripture, because my background is Christianity. I call myself a Christian metaphysician, but before that metaphysical aspect took place, I had come out of maybe more mainstream or more traditional circles, right? So in those circles, we talk about the idea about the power of life and death is in the tongue, right? So it just speaks to the power of our words. And so this card talks about the power of our words. Now, also for me, as a coach, I'm always mindful about relanguaging our experiences. So that's another meaning of this card. So again, it could talk about on the surface level, or the primary meaning is about the use of affirmations. But the underlying meanings are about the power of our words and being willing to relanguage our experiences, right? So that's affirmations. Next card is the Akashic Records. And so this I wanted to include because of my personal connection to Metatron. So I always credit Metatron for opening me up, metaphysically speaking. It happened when I was actually learning to access the Akashic Records. I took a class with a facilitator, and I experienced something, and I'll elaborate more on that with a card in the deck. There's a card in the deck, that talks about that experience. But it happened during an Akashic Records workshop or class, and so I felt it would only be right and fitting to have an Akashic Records card in the deck again. Remember, now Metatron and Archangel Sandalphon figure prominently in this deck, so I use this card as a nod to Archangel Metatron. So that's the Akashic Records card. Next up we have the NIL card, and so NIL is a personal angel that has come to me. So what happened was, with this particular experience, I was at the time receiving Reiki. This was before I became a Reiki practitioner. So there are 2 cards in the deck that talk about angel visitations I had while I was experiencing Reiki. This is one of them. So what happened in both of these cases is that while receiving Reiki, I would envision an angel. Like all of a sudden I started seeing an angel, and the angel was like looking at me. Now I had my eyes closed and I'm on the table receiving Reiki, and all of a sudden it just seemed like an angel was popping in and watching the experience. And so in both cases I asked the angel who are you? And they each gave me their name. And when I came home to do research, I had to say to myself, oh, I hope I can remember the name. I hope I can remember the name. And then I would get home and I would look it up online, and there was actually an angel with that name. So that's credence to what my experience was. And it goes back to one of the things that I always say when I'm doing my card reading videos, is that you can't make this stuff up, right? For me, that was validation that I was not making the experience up, right? So what I learned is that this name, NIL, is actually a variation of Haniel, Archangel Haniel, who is the angel of intuition, the angel of the moon, and she rules lunar cycles, moon phases, right? But she's also about helping us be led and guided by our intuition, to trust our intuition, right? So that is one of the two cards that represents an angel who presented themselves to me and gave me their name, right? So that's the first one. Next card is, we have the Angels card. I call this the Angels card. And so, like I alluded to earlier, when I had my first angelic experience, that dream, I talked about how the angels came to me as beams of light. So this is a nod to that experience. And then, of course, if you are familiar with angel numbers, you will know that the number 444 talks about the idea about the angels are near you, they're drawing close to you, they are around you, and the more fours that are in the numerical sequence, the more angels that are around you. So that was a nod to that. So now the 444 is also, if I bring Metatron back into this, I had a dream where I was talking to Metatron. We were having this discussion. Only when I woke up, because I was so excited about having the opportunity to talk to Archangel Metatron, that I woke myself up and I jumped up with a start and I shouted Metatron's name aloud. And when I looked at the clock, it was 444. Again, you can't make that kind of stuff up, right? So the only thing about the experience is I don't remember what Archangel Metatron looked like, and I don't remember anything about the conversation, but I just woke up with this knowing that I was in the presence of Metatron and we were talking, right? So the card fits both of those experiences, right? So again, talks about the dream experience I had with the angels that got me started into forming a connection or bond with the angels, and then the dream I had where I was talking with Archangel Metatron. So that's the Angels card. Next card is the As Above, So Below card. And so for me, this just talks about the spiritual law or principle of as above, so below. Now, in the previous segment, I talked about the Magician card from Tarot, right? One of the other meanings of the Magician card in Tarot is as above, so below, because especially in the Rider-Waite-Smith variations, the Magician is seen with one arm raised pointing up to heaven and the other one pointing down to earth, right? So that's a nod to this. But for me, this card is a nod to both Metatron and Sandalphon, because in the study of the angels, the 72 angels, it's based on the tree of life. And so Metatron resides in the crown of the tree, and Sandalphon resides in the bottom of the tree, which is known as the kingdom, right? So one is in heaven and one is in earth. So it's a nod to them. And it talks about how spiritual law and principle shape and form our reality. Now that's based on my Christian metaphysician experience. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about that my form of new thought. That's what we call it. It's a movement called New Thought. That I am actually a student of unity. So unity is the church or the tradition that I have followed now since 1998. And so we talk about this idea about as above, so below, but we talk about it with the idea that everything that is experienced in the earth is based on an idea that was created in divine mind, right? So this card represents all of that. Okay, so next card is the Archangel Gabriel card, and so this is important to talk about. So when I was working on finding images for the Archangel cards in particular, there's at least 5 obvious ones, and then there are some that are nods that are not so obvious. But in the ones that actually have the name of the Archangel on them, I wanted to pick images that represent a symbol that's associated with the Archangel. And this is why. Actually, this was the first card I actually created in the deck. And the reason being is because if you are familiar with angel circles, like if you travel in angel circles and you hear people talk about angels or you see other angel card decks, you will probably no doubt know that Archangel Gabriel is depicted more often than not as female. Now, the angels, going with the idea that they are beams of light, remember that's my first experience with angels, and I still hold to that, is that they don't hold any particular form. But for me, when I think of Archangel Gabriel, I have always thought of Archangel Gabriel as male. And so I wanted to have a deck where the gender thing wasn't a thing, right? So I wanted to go with imagery that fit what the angel is known for in terms of its specialty rather than what it looks like, right? And here's the thing. I've actually never seen any of the archangels. When I'm receiving guidance from them, it all comes based on feeling, right? I usually get a significant or a telltale feeling, right? But I have never, quote unquote, seen what the angels, except for the two that I talked about earlier in my Reiki experience, right? Those are the only two I've actually visibly seen in some way. But the archangels I have never seen, right? So I wanted to do it this way. So I love the image. And here's the thing. So the horn represents Gabriel being the messenger angel, right? So the horn represents news and announcements. But the color represents the throat chakra, right? Again, Gabriel's all about speaking your truth, right? So that was a way to work with Archangel Gabriel, and plus for me to get over, my sense, based on my experience, that Archangel Gabriel is male. Okay, so that's what I did with that. So I figured since that was the first card and I loved how it turned out, I would do the same thing with all the Archangel cards, right? So the next few are all going to be Archangel cards. So the next one is Archangel Jeremiah. So this is an archangel who deals with life review. And so one of the things that I have based on the depiction is that I had a profound experience with Archangel Jeremiah during a Mercury retrograde. Now remember, I talked about the deck being created during a Mercury retrograde, right? So in the experience, Archangel Jeremiah delivered a message about Mercury retrogrades, because we all talk about in astrological circles about what you might want to reconsider doing during a retrograde, or things that could happen during a retrograde, right? So we talk about the idea about, travel issues or communication issues or technological issues, all those kinds of things. But in this experience that I had with Archangel Jeremiah, it was communicated to me that a Mercury retrograde is actually a wonderful time for the 3 R's, and here they are: review, reflect, and reconsider. And so when I decided I wanted to include Archangel Jeremiah in the deck, I wanted to try and find an image for me that fit Mercury retrograde. So what I love about the image is that all the colors, again, represent the angels, right? So that is my Archangel Jeremiah card. And so it fits 2 things. Number one, when it comes up, it could represent the things that Archangel Jeremiah is known for, which is life review, evaluation, assessment, those kinds of things. But the underlying messages of this card is about reviewing something, reflecting on it, and if possible, reconsideration. And then, of course, it can also signify a Mercury retrograde, right? So that's my Archangel Jeremiah card. Next card is Archangel Metatron. And so, of course, the classic symbol that is associated with Metatron is Metatron's cube. So I thought that would just be a wonderful symbol for that. So that is my card for Archangel Metatron. Now again, remember, Metatron is the primary inspiration for this deck, closely followed by Sandalphon. So I love the card. Okay, next card is Archangel Sandalphon. So Archangel Sandalphon, for me, I regard Archangel Sandalphon as his twin because they have a similar bond or connection or experience, right? So I love the image because when I found it, it was just the way it is depicted on the card in terms of the music notes being vertical, right? So the orientation of the sheet of music is different, and that just struck me. Archangel Sandalphon is known as the angel of music, right? So for me, the card is a nod to one of his specialties, but it's also about being tuned in, right? When Metatron informed me that I was going to be forming a closer bond or connection to Sandalphon, the message was that it was about being more tuned in, that I was going to be tuning into the frequency of Archangel Sandalphon more, because angels have a particular vibrational frequency, right? So I loved the message, but that's what I wanted to have reflected in my Archangel Sandalphon card. So that is Archangel Sandalphon. Next card is Archangel Uriel. And so here we have a lantern lighting up a dark space. And for me, Uriel's name translates to light of God. And so Archangel Uriel for me is all about illumination, right? And so the lantern is a classic nod to that, right? So, but Uriel is also about, insight, epiphanies, ahas. And so the light also represents that. Now, for me personally, I have a psychological background. And so Archangel Uriel for me is known as the psychologist angel. Again, going with the idea about epiphanies and ahas, right? It's about illuminating your mind, right? Dropping in new insights, new perspectives. That's what I'm always hoping from a psychological perspective when I'm working with people, right? Is that they see their situations in a new way, right? So that is my nod to Archangel Uriel. So moving on, the next card is, here's the second angel that I had an experience with. So this is Archangel Cassiel, and I have mentioned Archangel Cassiel in this regard. Sometimes when I'm doing a tarot reading and the Temperance card comes up, I will make note to mention Archangel Cassiel, and this is why. Archangel Cassiel is known as the angel of temperance, right? And so I had other angels associated with the Temperance card prior to my personal connection to Cassiel, and so then I just added Cassiel to the list of angels that I associate with the Temperance card. But this was the second angel that I had experience with while I was receiving Reiki. And what I love about the image is that Archangel Cassiel actually looked like that. I mean, if you look at his haircut, that's a pretty modern haircut, right? But that's how Archangel Cassiel presented himself to me. And the interesting thing about it is that when Cassiel came to me, he didn't have wings. I actually really just saw his head. And here's the thing about angels and how they appear to us, because my head is tingling, so I'm going to mention this. So I talked about angels appearing as beams of light for me, right? But also, too, for the people who envision angels as people with wings, that's how they will appear to that person or those people, right? The angels told me a long time ago is that they come in the form that will be easily recognized by the person who's having the angelic experience. So that is my story on Cassiel. Cassiel for me represents temperance, but it's also the angel of tears. And so what I like about the image, it kind of looks like the angel has been crying, right? Especially on this side of the face, right? But I just love the image. So that is Archangel Cassiel. Next card is, okay, so this is one of 5 Reiki cards, because what happened was after I started receiving Reiki, I felt led and inspired to become a Reiki practitioner. So Choku-rei is one of the Reiki symbols that I work with when I am either giving Reiki to myself or to another person. And this is known as the power symbol. So what I love about the backdrop being red is that red is a power color. And then the gold is known as a spiritual healing color. It usually indicates a person with a spiritual healing gift or ability, the color gold, right? And so I love the image, but that's usually what it represents. It usually represents power, So what I do is when I draw the symbol, and if you are familiar with Reiki and you are a level 2 practitioner, you will know that that is the level you are first introduced to the symbols. And what I loved about it is that when my Reiki master teacher was teaching me this, she said we were going to draw the symbols, and I was down, right? Because remember now, I have a cartoonist background, so when I heard I was going to draw symbols, I'm like, what? I am so in. And so I still draw the symbols to this day. And so what I do is I draw the Choku-rei symbol on the palm of my hand as a way to kind of power up, right? So, but if you're not a Reiki practitioner and this card were to come up, it would suggest on some level, just being in your power or being empowered, that kind of thing, or the power being in your hands, right? If you go with the idea that Reiki is an energy that is channeled through your hands, right? So that is my Chokurei card. Next card is the Clairvoyance card. And so what I love about this card is a TV set. That's the image, right? And a television is a pun for tell-a-vision, right? So the TV set represents images that are projected that you get to see, right? And so in my mind, I'm always seeing imagery, right? So, you know, I label myself as an intuitive rather than psychic, but, you know, the words are interchangeable just based on whatever you believe about the words and the energy that's associated with the words, right? But for me, this is my dominant mode of receiving intuitive information. I am very visual, right? If you are watching my Oracle Outlook videos, or if you have for any length of time, you will know that I'm always talking about I'm seeing an image from a different card in a different deck, or the same card in a different deck when I'm talking about a card on the table, right? And so sometimes what happens is I will see a flash of an image to get me to say a particular thing. So I wanted to have a TV set on the Clairvoyance card. Now I will say this at this point. There are some cards that I'm going to redo for my final iteration. So the Clairvoyance card is one of those that I have chosen to redo. So what I will do at a later point in time is when I get the final deck, I will do a compare and contrast so you can see the cards that have changed and why I made the changes. So this is one of the cards that's going to be changed. But the symbology represents being able to see imagery, right? Okay. So that's Clairvoyance. And here we have the next card is Communication. So similar to the Clairvoyance card with a TV set, another way of receiving intuitive information is clairaudiently, which means that you hear messages, right? So the telephone is symbolic of that. But the Communication card for me, just on its surface level, can just represent all forms of communication. That's symbolized by the phone in the foreground. And then I found an image to superimpose the phone over that represents written forms of communication, right? So we have verbal by the phone and written with the background, right? And so this is another card that would be a nod to Archangel Gabriel, right? Being a communications angel, right? Or in this case, I'm being said to say a communications specialist. All right, so that's the communications card. So now moving on, we have the Counselor card. And so the reason for this card is that since this is a personal deck, I like to share what it is that I have learned about my particular spiritual gifts, talents, and abilities. So I am a counselor, and I've learned this through my dreams. Your dreams will always tell you, when the time is right, of course, what your spiritual talents, gifts, and abilities are. And so mine is a counselor, right? And so if you look at the caduceus, it is a clear symbolic representation of Archangel Raphael. So that is the angel that I also associate with this card. But the idea about counseling is an ability that is taught early on in life. And so what happens is that the counselor, in this particular case me, since this is my deck, life trains you in the way that you learn to step back and observe people, right? And so sometimes that comes from a place of maybe not fitting in or not feeling you belong. And as part of that experience, you may kind of withdraw and you become a spectator more than a participant. But what that really does, it kind of shapes your ability to observe, right? And so that is a nod to the counselor. But that's what it, so now it can also represent, because the color green represents healing. If you are familiar with the chakras, right, this would be akin to the heart chakra, and that's always talking about healing, right? So that could be another meaning of the card, is about healing, just healing generally speaking, or maybe healing particular types of issues, right? But again, the angel that's associated with this card is Archangel Raphael. Next card is, okay, so now this card talks about my feelings. I talked about my feelings, right? How I feel the angels. So this card is known as Crown Chakra Tingles. And so what I have learned over the years, this is the experience that I had when I was opened up during the Akashic Records class that I mentioned earlier with that card, right? So this is how I felt about being in the record. So I would have this tingling sensation either in my scalp or, you know, at the top of my head. or covering my whole head, and as I'm talking about it, I'm having the feeling right now as I'm talking about it. And so what would happen is that would be my tell that I was in my records. Then one day what happened was I was in a bookstore, and I was talking about the Akashic Record. I realized that the image on the card is shelves with books, right? It looks like a big library, right? But I was in a bookstore one day looking at books, and all of a sudden I had my crown chakra tingle experience. And I thought, I'm not thinking about the records. I'm not accessing the records. It was just very interesting. And I would have that feeling more and more outside of the records. So when I consulted my teacher and asked her about it, she said to me that that was the record keepers. That's what we refer to the record keepers when we're accessing the Akashic records. We call them the masters and the record keepers. She was saying that they were letting me know that I was forming a deep bonded connection to them, and I didn't need to be in the records to have that bond or connection. Right? So what I have learned since then is that the angels, and specifically Archangel Metatron, will open you up to receive angelic guidance or insight. And one of the ways they do that is through your crown chakra. So all this time I have been experiencing this feeling, and I just recently, this was only, I think, over the course of the last few months maybe, that I actually found the name for it. But it's called crown chakra tingle. So I wanted to have a card in there that reflected that. Next card. Here we have Cut the Cords. And so this is a card that is a nod to Archangel Michael. You can clearly see by the sword on the card, right? So there is a process that I use called cutting the cords. And what cords are energetic attachments to things that are no longer serving and supporting us. And so there's a process where you can cut the cords to things that maybe you have fear around, or that you have worry around, or that you have concern around, and you realize that the fear, the worry, and concern is not serving and supporting you. So when I take myself through this process, I ask Archangel Michael to come in and cut the cords so that I can have peace of mind. And so I wanted a card to reflect that. Now, if it's not about the process of cutting the cords, then this card would just be asking you, what would you be willing to detach yourself from? What would you be willing to cut or eliminate or release from your life, right? So that's the secondary meaning of the card. So again, that's a nod to Archangel Michael. Now the next card is one of the second of the Reiki symbols in the deck. And so this is Daikomyo. And so Daikomyo is a symbol that represents mastery in Reiki. But here's the thing about that. There is a phrase or a term called being a Reiki master teacher. I am one of those. I went through all my levels of Reiki training. But here's the thing. The real truth about being a master in anything is understanding that you have more to learn. And so I wanted to include this card because I have Daikomyo tattooed on my arm. So I have a lot of Reiki symbols on my body, but this one is tattooed on my arm. So what happened is when I started Reiki, I got the traditional Japanese kanji that represents Reiki. And then when I finished, I got a tattoo of Daikomyo. So that was my way of acknowledging my coming full circle in terms of my Reiki experience, right? In terms of my training anyway. Right, so that's Daikomyo. Next card is, oh, I love this image. So this is a card I called Deja Vu and Past Lives. And so what this is that when I was younger, I would experience these intense feelings of deja vu. And so if you've never heard of the experience, deja vu happens like when you're with someone or you're doing something where you have this moment of like, I've been here before, I've done this before, that kind of thing. And I used to have those as a child all the time. And each time it would stop me in my tracks. What I have learned as a result of having those experiences, this is my particular belief on it based on my own personal experience, is that every time I had that experience, it was a way of letting me know that I was on track with what I intended to do in this life incarnation, which is why the other part of this card is called Past Lives, right? And what I love about the image is that there's a man who's holding a clock, and he's looking at a photo, or, possibly a mirror, looking into that, and each one is going further and further. It's just flipping the image in a way. When I saw the image, I'm like, that is so cool. So that is Deja Vu and Past Lives. Next card is the divination card, of course, right? And what I love about the image is that I didn't want to feature a particular deck of cards, again going with the idea about copyright and potential copyright infringement, right? So I found this image on Pixabay, and I love it because even though it looks like a deck of cards, the imagery up here doesn't look like any cards that I recognize. So I love the image, but of course I had to have a card about divination. Divination actually is like the bedrock or the foundation of my spiritual practice. So I had to have a card acknowledging that. So that's divination. Next card is the dolphin card. Okay, so when I was sharing images on social media from the digital version of this deck, this was the first card I posted. And I wanted to have a card that showed a personal experience that I was connected to. And I love this because just like angels, even further back, I've always had a personal affinity for dolphins. When I was younger, I didn't want a dog or a cat, probably like most little boys or girls would ask their parents for. I asked my mom for a pet dolphin. And she said to me, "Where are we going to keep it?" And I said, "In the tub, of course." Like, duh. Right? So I've always had a personal affinity for dolphins. When I was younger, and I was in elementary school, so this must have been either first or second grade, I had the idea to write a novel. I was going to write a novel because back then I was into science fiction. So I was going to write a novel, and the name of the novel was called Dolphin World. And so the premise of the book was that it took place in an underwater city, right? The setup was an underwater city where humans and dolphins lived together, and they had a telepathic bond or communication. Now, I just said I was in elementary school, right? So one of the things I like about dolphins, they symbolize higher intelligence. And so I'm thinking like, okay, so that was where I was at in terms of my upbringing, right? So that gives you an idea into the mind of James Himm Mitchell when he was a kid, right? So the picture is actually one from my own personal collection, and I was on a cruise at the time this was taken, and I went to a dolphin aquarium in Cozumel, Mexico, and I got to play with the dolphins, and that was like a dream come true. So when I'm working with this card, this is like my version of a spirit animal or power animal card in other oracle decks, right? And it also, the underlying meaning of the card represents a dream coming true, right? Because at that moment, I had a lifelong dream come true. So, that's the dolphin card. Oh, and I should say, in the image, what I'm doing is I am doing what's called the dolphin hug. And so the trainer taught us how to do it. And so what you do is you take your first hand and you want to cup the dolphin underneath that. And then you want to take your other hand and you want to reach across the blowhole. And somehow the dolphins respond to that, right? And so we were taught to do that. So in the image, I'm actually doing what's called a dolphin hug. Okay, next card is the dreams card. Now, again, just like divination, dreams have a huge, profound place in my life. Like I said earlier, everything that I've done metaphysically or spiritually speaking, or maybe even just general life experience, has had a dream precede it. So the dreams card is very significant. It had to be in the deck. And so I found this image of a dream catcher, and I actually have several dream catchers in the house. One above my bed, because that's what the tradition is with dream catchers. You put them above your bed, right? And so I have one above my bed, but when I saw this image, I just loved the coloring, and then I wanted to find a somewhat neutral palette to put the dream catcher against, and so I love how that card came out. So that's a dreams card. Next card is ear chakras. Okay, so just like I had the crown chakra tingles card earlier, that was a nod to Metatron, right? This one is a nod to Sandalphon. Remember I talked about Sandalphon being the angel of music? So if you're no stranger to my card reading videos, you will know that sometimes I make reference to songs that are playing in my head, right? So what I have learned since then is that that is how Archangel Sandalphon works with me, right? So another thing you might experience around your ear chakras is if you're not hearing lines of music, then you might experience ringing in your ears or that your ears pop. That's another way of your ear chakras being activated, right? So, and I should say this disclaimer, like if that's a continual thing, you might want to rule out the possibility of something going on with your ears on a physical level. You know, that's of course first and foremost. You want to rule out the physical, and then you could go with the spiritual or the metaphysical, right? But for me, when I experience the ear chakra moment, it's usually from hearing a song playing in my head. And it's usually one that you can't get out of your head, like you're wondering, like, where did that come from? Or why can't I stop thinking about this song? Or why is this song always playing in my head? You may be having an ear chakras moment. Okay, next card is the Elder Brother and Way Shower card. And so this card for me represents Christ consciousness. Now remember, I talked about coming from a Christian background, and in Christian metaphysics, we call the Christ, Jesus, the Elder Brother and Way Shower. And when I first heard the term, I just loved the term, right? Jesus for me is a master teacher, a master healer, a master psychic. Yes, I went there, a master psychic and a master psychologist, because Jesus was always talking about you checking yourself before you check somebody else, right? So I just love all those things about Jesus. But Jesus, in this particular case, is his main thing, or his main message is all about having a personal connection to divinity, the divinity of your understanding, right? Whatever you choose to call God, right? That's Jesus's role. But in New Age metaphysical circles, we refer to Jesus or Christ as the Christ consciousness. But what I loved about the image when I found it is that Jesus is standing, you know, before an archway or a threshold with all those little stars glimmering in the back, right? So I just love the image. So for me, that represents Christ's consciousness. So that's the Elder Brother and Way Shower. Next card is the Existential Angst card. So this is the one card in the deck that I would say is a bit of a challenging card. And this is why. One of the things that I go through bouts of, or with, or through, is what I have now languaged as existential angst. So for me, this happens when I'm questioning what my purpose is. And it's usually as a result of something going on in my external world that causes me to think about that. You know, full disclosure, sometimes it happens around the work that I do as a spiritual practitioner. And, you know, and so the card being in the color blue represents one of the effects of my existential angst is that I sometimes feel a deep, profound sadness. I feel a deep sense of depression. You know, I have language when I'm in those spaces of being in the hole. And the only thing about it is I don't know when I'm going to get out of the hole. And so I wanted to have a card that reflected that, because that is something that's huge and profound for me. Eventually I get out of the hole. But when I'm in it, it usually revolves around this questioning about my purpose, why am I here, what is it I'm here to do, how do I serve, where am I needed, all those kinds of things. But usually those questions come as a result of something happening in my external world, that gets me to start thinking that or questioning that, right? So usually it's around some form of doubt. That's probably the best way to put it. But that is a powerful card, and I am so glad to have it in the deck, because it's something that is profound for me as terms of a challenging experience, right? And the beautiful thing about having a card like this in an angel deck especially is because life is not always pretty, life is not always pleasant, life is not always sunshine and rainbows and peaches and cream and, you know, and light, right? Sometimes we have our dark moments, and when I'm in the hole, I'm having a dark moment. And even with that, the angels are with me. So I wanted to have that reflected in the cards. So that is my existential angst card. Next card is the gifts card. And so this is a card that just talks about one's gifts, talents, and abilities. Again, I made mention of that earlier. What I love about the image is that the stars coming out of the box makes me think of stars from Lenormand. Now remember, I read a great number of systems. And so when I was creating this deck, I was told that I could incorporate tarot meanings that I have for certain cards or Lenormand meanings. So when I see the stars, I may sometimes think of stars from Lenormand. And so in that particular case, stars represents inspiration, guidance, direction, and clarity, right? So the angel that's associated with this card is Archangel Raziel, who helps us with our spiritual gifts, talents, and abilities, right? So that is gifts. Next card is the Guardian Angel card. I wanted to have a Guardian Angel card, and this is why. So as I was talking about the Archangel cards, when I was creating those, I felt I was slighting my guardian angels, right? Because the guardian angels that are assigned to us, we are their divine assignment, right? They have chosen to take us on as we move through this life. And yes, you could work with archangels, but you have angels that are closer to you than the archangels, right? So I wanted to have a card that reflected that. And what I love about the image is that it looks like a cherub type angel, right? Representing, angels that are with you since your birth, right? So that is my guardian angel card. And this is another Reiki symbol, although there's a story behind this. So this is known as Han Shaze Shonen. And so now all the Reiki symbols are in the form of Japanese kanji. That's what I call it. Now, the Han Shaze Shonen character does not look like an alarm clock, right? What happened was, one day while I was giving Reiki to someone, and I was thinking about drawing Han Shaze Shonen, the thing about the character is that it has 26 strokes, so it's a very long symbol to draw out. And one day I said to Han Shaze Shonen, I'm like, there's got to be an easier way to bring that energy up. How do I connect with you in an easier way than drawing this long symbol, long drawn out symbol? And Han Shaze Shonen responded by showing me an image of a purple alarm clock, specifically a purple alarm clock. So when I was going through images of alarm clocks and I found this, now I did not modify the coloring. The picture was already purple. And I'm like, it's perfect, right? So that is a nod to Han Shaze Shonen. Now, the interesting thing about the alarm clock is that Han Shaze Shonen is known as the time and distance symbol, right? Can't make this stuff up. So that's that card. Next card is the Indigo card. And so Metatron works with indigo children, right? So of course now we can widen that out to represent indigo, rainbow, and crystal children, right? But indigo children are children who are heightened in terms of their sensitivity, and that's a way of talking about their intuition, right? But the other thing about indigo children, and now indigo adults, because I am an indigo adult, and so besides the sensitivity issue that I have, or I shouldn't say issue, a characteristic, that's probably a better term, that I have is I also have a quiet rebellion against authority. So sometimes indigos are more outspoken, but because of my tendency to step back and observe, I'm not as outspoken in all cases or all situations. So I talk about being a quiet rebel, right? So again, it started in my family. I grew up in a single parent household with a mother, and so lots of times when she was exercising her parental authority, I would have the thought, like when I was grown, I wouldn't have anybody telling me what to do or how to do it, which is probably why I've been single for as long as I have, right? So anyway, so for me, my indigo nature is to quietly rebel, but I still have a little bit of a rebellious streak. So that is a characteristic or a trait of indigos. But again, the gist of this card is that Metatron works closely with indigo children, right? So I wanted to have that in the deck. Now the baby on the card would just represent, if we're not talking about indigos specifically, then it would represent, a something that is in its infancy in terms of stage of development, right? Because it makes me think of something that's in utero, something that's still growing and developing, that kind of thing. So that's the indigo card. Next card. Here we have the infinite intelligence card. And so this is a card, and I want to be careful not to offend anyone when I say this, but this is my personal experience. For me, the infinite intelligence card is a reference to God, right? So now, for me, I always had an intellectual approach to God. I was always thinking about God, and I would always be thinking about how, when I was presented with maybe a more traditional or mainstream idea about God, how it didn't make sense. I couldn't understand it. But then when I got into Unity, we have a way of expressing God as divine mind, and I just loved the idea. So one of my names for God is infinite intelligence. And what I love about the image is that it's a binary code. And binary code here in the picture anyway is a pattern of ones and zeros. The 1 is a nod in angel numbers about keeping your thoughts positive because you create based on what you think, right? And in Christian metaphysics, we have this idea that thought creates experience, right? So I loved seeing all the 1s on the card. And then the 0 is about God and ideals, and it also represents the whole, the all, the everything. So I just love that. So that is the infinite intelligence card. It is my God card, right? But what I have learned is, since playing with the physical deck to come up with meanings of the cards outside of my, maybe primary or dominant meaning, is that this card can also represent coding, and it can also represent things having to do with computers and technology. So if you don't subscribe to the God thing, then this card could also fit those kinds of things. But anyway, so that is infinite intelligence. Next card is Lakshmi. And so Lakshmi is a nod to the idea about ascended masters, right? And so I had a Lakshmi experience when I was meditating one day, and all of a sudden I started seeing letters forming in my mind. And so the letters that formed were Lakshmi. And I thought, okay. So I wrote it down, and then I went to Google and I put in the letters as they presented themselves, right? And Google, in its infinite wisdom, said, "Did you mean Lakshmi?" And so I clicked on that. And so then I discovered that that was Lakshmi's way of making contact with me, right? And so the interesting thing about it is, I just talked about having a Christian background, right? And so if you're familiar with Lakshmi, you know that she is a Hindu goddess, right? So I thought that was very interesting. And so here's the thing that I learned from that experience. It doesn't matter what your particular spiritual path or tradition is in the moment. If a particular spiritual entity or being or energy wants to make contact with you, it will. And it doesn't matter what your background is, right? So I was fascinated with that experience, right? So the card can represent Lakshmi. And what I did was, I was trying to find images of Lakshmi, but what I noticed is the images that I found didn't resonate with me. But what I did find is that the commonality was that Lakshmi was always seen sitting in a lotus, right? And so I wanted a pink lotus, right? Pink is the color of unconditional love, and it's a very feminine color for me, right? So I found this image and I loved it because it's very soft, right? So this is a nod to ascended masters. But if I take all of that energy out of it and just want to create another meaning for it, Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance and prosperity, right? So this could be talking about, a prosperity consciousness, abundance, things of that nature. If you're familiar with tarot, it would be more like, the Empress card from tarot, right? All of that kind of stuff. So that is Lakshmi. Next card is the Life Purpose card. And this is another card that makes reference to Archangel Gabriel. And I love the image because it's very understated. But in most depictions early on, or earlier depictions of Gabriel, I should say, Gabriel is seen holding a lily, right? And so that is symbolic of the Annunciation. And the Annunciation is the episode in Christian scripture where Gabriel informs Mary that she's going to give birth to the Christ, right? And so that she was being informed at that moment of her divine life purpose. So I wanted a card that reflects that. And here's the thing for me. I go through periods, and they're tied closely to my existential angst, right? Where I'm always wondering what my life purpose is, right? So this card can be talking about life purpose. So here's what I've learned about life purpose. Life purpose can go one or two ways. You could either talk about your spiritual path when you're talking about life purpose, or you could be talking about your spiritual career. So for me, it's always usually in the frame of my spiritual career, right? Because I do spiritually based work, right? And so what I love about this card, about the symbol of the lily, is I could also read this as lilies from Lenormand, right? And then the last thing I would say, because the lily is open, is that it can represent, something that's blooming or something that's blossoming. So that is the life purpose card. Next card is the Magi card. And so this is a nod to magic. I have a circle of pagan friends, and they have adopted me, even though I come from a Christian background. They have adopted me as an honorary pagan, right? So this idea with the image on the card fits, like, I was thinking about wizardry and magic and things like that. So that is the reason for the card. Now, in terms of meaning, for me, it holds the same meaning as the Ace of Spades when I read playing cards, and here's one of the meanings. The Ace of Spades, actually, one of its more mystical or esoteric meanings, it's known as the Order of the Magi card, right? And so usually it talks about being initiated into some sort of practice where you are exploring some sort of esoteric knowledge or mystical wisdom, something of like that. It's usually embarking on moving into a period of initiation into something, either esoteric or occult or something of that nature, right? So that is one of the meanings of this card for me, but that's the Magi card. Next card is the medium channel card. Okay, so this is a nod to where I'm at right now. One of the things that I'm currently doing is I am sitting in what's called a development circle to work on developing my mediumship and my channeling ability. So I wanted to have a card that reflects that. Now, how I got into that, because I didn't identify myself as a medium. I had a friend who is a spiritualist minister. I read her cards one day, and at the end of her session, she said to me, "You are a medium." And I said to her, "What?" Because my frame of reference for a medium is people like John Holland or James Van Praagh, who talk to those who have transitioned, those who are here in this world and transitioned into spirit, right? Those people who have passed or crossed over, those kinds of things. And I had never had that experience. My experience has always been more with guides and angels and sensing their presence, right? So I had to learn to widen my perspective when it came to the idea of what a medium or a channel is, right? But I love the image. Every time I look at that image, it kind of just takes my breath away a little bit. So, but that is the medium channel card. Next card is the miracle card. So I love this, right? So I wanted to find a card that talked about divine intervention, but I didn't like any of the images that I found when I put in the words divine intervention. So here's a little thing about this card. So what happened was I found this card and its orientation was like this. And I looked at it and it was under rainbows. For some reason, it was depicted as a rainbow. Or that was the word that was this part of the search for the picture. So I looked at it and I just loved how it looked because, again, the colors represent all the angels to me, right? As I was looking at the image, the angel said, change the orientation. And that becomes one of the meanings of this card. When the miracle card comes up, it's usually a nod for me that the way I'm looking at a situation, I need to change my orientation around it, right? And then it's also about alignment, being in divine alignment, right? But the word miracle, like where did the word miracle come from, right? If this is a card about divine intervention, well, a miracle is a form of divine intervention, right? But the word miracle for me comes from A Course in Miracles, and a miracle is defined as a shift in perception. Right? And so we have miracles all the time if you stop and think about how many aha moments you've had, how many epiphanies you've had, how many realizations you've had. Each one of those moments is a miracle, according to A Course in Miracles, right? So that is the reason for the name of the card. But that's my little story about that. Next card is Mirror Work. This is another card for me that represents a spiritual tool that I have put into my life and I have seen profound, results. So Mirror Work is a process that was created by the late Louise Hay, who is known, and I say is because her energy is still here, that's her legacy, is known as the Queen of Affirmations. Remember, the very first card in this deck was the Affirmations card, right? So mirror work is a process where you stand in front of the mirror and you look at yourself and you say these words. You say, I love you. And the idea here is you pay attention to your feelings and your thoughts as you're saying that, right? Are you having thoughts that say, that can't be true, right? And if so, you need to work on those thoughts. The whole process getting you to either like or even love yourself, right? But this card, generally speaking, if it's not about the process of miracle work, or mirror work, I said miracle work. If it's not about the process of mirror work, it's about self-reflection, right? You may be at a stage in life where you're looking at your image or your identity, and saying, who am I now, right? And I love the image of the young man looking at himself in the mirror. Oh, I just love it. And it's making me think of the song Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson, yeah? All right, so that's mirror work. Next card is New Thought, and I just love the image, right? So New Thought is the spiritual movement that I have become a part of, for all these years, right? And so New Thought really is just, be willing to think a different way about the situation, right? But what I love about the image is that the angel looks so pensive and he's looking up as if he's looking at divine mind, or he's looking up at the light, right? The light is beaming on one side of his face, right? It looks like he's considering an idea or he's about to receive an idea, right? So that is the New Thought card. I love that card. Okay, next card is the Prayer and Meditation card, and again, it's one of those images that I love. And so Prayer and meditation, to me, are two sides of the same coin. Prayer is when we're talking to Spirit, and we're petitioning, we're asking, we're requesting for certain things to show up in our life. And then meditation is the other side of that, where you're sitting in silence, and you're waiting for the answer to come, right? So this is the time where you're supposed to be receptive, and receptive to the voice of Spirit, right? So that is prayer and meditation. But I just love the image of, a Buddhist monk sitting in prayer and meditation with his mala beads. I just love the image. The next card is the Reiki card. So this is a card that talks about Reiki in and of itself. And I just love the image. And what I did was I found a filter that was light green. And every time I pull the card, I just go, I love the color of the card. But this represents Reiki in and of itself. But it could also represent other forms of healing modalities. For instance, if it's not Reiki, then this could be healing touch or quantum touch or some other type of modality along those lines. Or it could just represent that you are putting energy into healing. And it could be healing on a physical level. It could be healing on a mental level, in emotional levels, even a spiritual level, right? And the color being green is another nod to Archangel Raphael. So that is Reiki. Next card is one of the last Reiki symbols in the deck, and this is Seiheki. And Seiheki is a symbol that I draw when I want to work on releasing emotional or mental negativity. And one of the things I like about it, when I was learning how to draw the symbol, I was told it's like, think of it as a dragon. And so I just always loved that. And so that is what this symbol looks like in terms of how you draw it. But that is Seiheki. So for me, Seiheki comes up as a card to say, is there something on a mental or emotional level that's negative, quote unquote, that I would be willing to release or heal myself from, right? So that is Seiheki. Next card is the Signs and Synchronicities card. Okay, the first thing I want to say is that this is another card that's going to be tweaked or modified because I don't like the title up above. I'm going to, in my next iteration, is going to be below. That's just a little, when I put it there, I'm like, oh, okay, I lived with it in the moment, and then, after the order was placed, I'm like, oh, I could have done it differently. So, there's a nod to that. So that's going to be another card you're going to see done differently when I get the final iteration done. Okay. But the number 1111 is a number that a lot of us see in terms of, and that's why I wanted it digital, like a digital clock. So a lot of us experience that. And so for me, I have learned that the 1111 number is an awakening number, right? It's something is opening up, spiritually speaking. So sometimes people call it a portal or a gateway, but I just tend to think of it as coming to some kind of an awakening, right? Now for me, the number 11 is associated with Archangel Metatron. So whenever I see 1111 on a clock, I stop for a moment and I silently say, or aloud, depending on where I am, I say Metatron's name, and I'm acknowledging the presence of Metatron. Right? That became a thing between me and Metatron. I would see 1111 and I go, Metatron. So the other thing about the 1111, especially if I see 1111 at night, another angel that I associate with that is one of my birth angels from the 72 angels, and that's Yabamiya. And angels in that system operate, or they have a window of time that's 20 minutes long. And so Yabamiya's time is between 11 p.m. to 11:19 p.m. So whenever I see 11:11 on the clock at night, first I acknowledge Metatron, and then I acknowledge Yabamiya, right? So, but this could be a card that talks about any kind of sign or synchronicity, right? It's usually talking about the universe at work. And so if you're somewhat intellectual or left brain like me, then one of the surest ways that the angels or the universe can get your attention is through numerical patterns or sequences, right? So that is signs and synchronicities. Next card is the Spirit Guide card. And similar to the Guardian Angel card, I wanted to create a card where, because I was spending so much time talking about angels, I'm like, I don't want to, bypass my spirit guides. So this card can represent that energy. And spirit guides for me are just like your guardian angels. There is at least one guide who has taken on you as their divine assignment. So they are with you from birth until you make your transition. And then other guides come in based on whatever it is that you're moving through, or if you develop a new interest or something of that nature. Guides come in and out, but you have at least one that's with you the entire way through. So that is a nod to the spirit guide. Next card is the Star Person card. Okay, so the Star Person card is my Star Seed card in the deck. So for me, going along with the idea about being a counselor, where I talked about earlier about this idea about not fitting in, not feeling like you have a sense of belonging. When I was a child, again, now remember, I had a pretty science fiction kind of mind back in the day, right? So I used to have the thought with my family in particular is that I looked like them. Genetically speaking, I looked like them. But I often felt like I didn't fit in with them. I also felt like I had been dropped into that family. And a lot of times it didn't make sense. And then sometimes too, as a child, a lot of the things that I experienced in the world, or how I looked at the world anyway, didn't make sense to me. So a little aside is when I was growing up, I was given the nickname of Spock from Star Trek. And so, if you are familiar with Star Trek, then you know that Spock spent a lot of the time of the run of the show trying to understand the human condition, right? A lot of times I just didn't get it. The human thing didn't make sense to me. So that was a nod to my being a star person. And then it moved on from Spock to when the Next Generation came out to Data. So my name changed. And then recently, this energy coming back, someone at my church referred to me as Tuvok. From, I think that's, I'm not sure if that's Voyager or Deep Space Nine. Somebody will have to refresh my memory. But I do know that Tuvok was a Vulcan, right? And so I said, oh, that energy is coming back in again because somebody just acknowledged me as Tuvok, right? So, but that's my gist of the Star Person card. So again, it's this feeling of like alienation, and that's a pun on being an alien, or just feeling like you don't fit in, you don't belong, or that something is alien, which is another way of saying strange or foreign to you, right? So that's all my take on the Star Person card. But I love the image. Next card is the Study card. So this is, remember I said with stars from the gift card and Lily from the life purpose card, this is like book, right, from Lenormand, right? So all the meanings that I have for the book card in that system, I carry over to this. But the pun that I usually have with this is about being a reader, because you read a book, right? And just like you read cards, right? So that's a pun for being a reader. Now, the archangel that's associated to this card is Archangel Zadkiel, who works closely with students, right? Which is why it's called Study. But that is the Study card. Then the next card here is the Tree of Life. And so now I talked about the 72 angels, and the 72 angels all correspond to placements on the Tree of Life. So this is a nod to Kabbalah, or the Kabbalah, however you want to pronounce that. And what happened was, how I got into that is that I had a dream. And this is around the time where Dorian Virtue, now remember, I said I was a certified angel card reader, right? So during that time where she was in transition, moving from where she was to where she is now, in terms of her spiritual path and what she believes to be true for her, is I had a dream that I was with Dorian Virtue. She was standing to my left, and if you're familiar with Dorian Virtue, you'll know that she's a brunette now, and she has been a brunette for a few years now. But in the dream, she was blonde. And so when I first became familiar with Dorian Virtue's work, she was blonde then, right? And so in the dream, she's blonde. And we're walking down a hallway to a large meeting room. So the hallway in a dream for me symbolically represents a transitional phase or period, right? So we get into the meeting room, and we're sitting at a round table, and there are other people who were there, like they were waiting for us before the meeting started. But Dorian Virtue was holding the meeting. And she said that she had written another book. And she was passing the book around for us to look at. So now the book was this big, huge binder. And it was made from hardcover material, like they made from books that were printed at the turn of the 20th century. So if you're familiar with the color, so you know, like they were like this green color or a wine color. So in the dream, the book was wine color. And by the time it got to me, it had this elaborate gold font written on the cover, and the title was The Kabbalah of God. And I woke up, right? So that got me into studying Kabbalah, and that's how I got into the traditional study of angels, which is also known as the 72 angels, right? So the interesting thing about the image, what I love about it, here's a nod where I talked about earlier with the as above, so below card, right? The crown of the tree is where Metatron resides, and then the bottom of the tree is where Sandalphon resides, right? So it's as above, so below. And then one day, speaking of dreams, I had this kind of dream vision. I was taking a nap, and when I feeling like I was about to wake up, I had this dream where I saw the tree. And I saw the sphere, the crown, and then the kingdom sphere. And they were merging. They were coming together. And I thought that was the coolest thing, right? And so, as I'm talking about that, that would be about the bond between Metatron and Sandalphon, right? So, but that is a nod to those experiences with the Tree of Life card for me. Next card is Twins. Okay, so the Twins is a nod to, again, Archangel Sandalphon and Archangel Metatron, because I consider them to be twin energies or twin souls, right? And this is also a card that can talk about relationships, because it's the only card in the deck that I actually have two of something on, a pair of something on. So this card can represent a relationship, a couple, a partnership. If you want to think of Lenormand, you could think of like birds from Lenormand, right, and all of those, because in my particular deck, my favorite deck of Lenormand cards, there's two birds on a card, and so for me that represents a partnership or a relationship, that kind of thing. And so, but the message I got when I was creating the card is, birds of a feather flock together, right? So this is just about being around people who are like-minded, or that there's a similarity or a connection that you each share, right? So that is the Twins card. So if a person is more spiritually minded or more metaphysical minded, this is not a concept I subscribe to, but I have heard of it. So the word twins can make you also think of twin flames, right? So that's another aspect of the card. Okay, we're nearing the end. So here we have one of the final cards, and that is, you are the best authority on you. And so this is my higher self card, right? But going with that as a thing, the idea of you are the best authority on you is that other people will offer thoughts, ideas, perspectives on who they think you are. But in the end, you get to decide whether any of that is going to be true or not, right? You are always going to be the best authority on you that there ever will be, right? And so the higher self is an idea, like your higher self is always communicating to you about you. But the question is, are you listening? What I love about the image is that the crown chakra on the figure is lit up, but also so is the heart chakra, the heart space, right? So for me, the crown chakra can be about, downloads, ahas, epiphanies, right? Like I've talked about already. But this is about what lights your heart up, right? So that is my nod on, you are the best authority on you, right? So I always say, when somebody's telling me something, what they think about me in terms of their perception or their observation, I always go, okay, first I say, consider the source, and consider that whether it's well-intentioned or not. You always have to do that, because sometimes it's well-intentioned and then sometimes it's not, right? You always have to, and then if it's not well-intentioned, then you really need to consider the source, right? Like, who are they to tell you about you, right? Kind of thing. But in the end, I get to decide, because I'm the best authority on me. I know myself in ways that nobody else will ever know me, right? So that was the gist of the card, and I felt like based on that, that card had to be in the deck, right? So that is that. So now, this would have been the last card in the deck, because I thought I was done. And then what happened was, my angel said, you need to have another card in the deck that represents you. And so they gave me this imagery. So the card is the intuitive card. So they gave me the visual on how they wanted that card to look. So they instructed me to stand in front of a backdrop and position my hands like this. And I did that. And so it symbolically represents me tuning in. This is another way that I feel the angels, is through my temples, right? Which is why my hands are placed the way they are. And I did that. And then what happened was, I wanted to remove the background. And when I went to a filter to remove the background, and I didn't catch it until the card was done. So, done and sent, right? It was in the printer, so it was too late. And then I found a backdrop to superimpose my image on, right? And I love the background because it looks like awareness. Like, it reminds me of the nimbus of awareness that's around the hanged man's head in tarot, right? So it's that, but each one of the orbs could be an angel, right? And so it's like tuning into angelic energy or frequency, right? But you'll also notice that I superimposed a third eye. So one of the things that I have been doing is I have been doing what's called decalcifying my pineal gland, right? And it's because of the intuitive work that I do, and I do so much of it, is that sometimes you could create what's called calcification on your pineal gland, right? And so when I heard of that, I'm going like, oh my gosh, I wonder if I need to decalcify my pineal gland. So one of the meanings of this card, besides being in tune and receiving intuitive guidance, is that there may be a period of time where you are actively working on decalcifying your pineal gland. So that is the Oracle of Himm. And so there you have it. So that is the deck that I have been creating since March the 11th, and I am so excited about it. So as I've alluded to probably throughout the exploration of the cards, is that I am working on the final iteration. Once I got the initial test copy deck, I went through it and I decided what I liked, what I really liked, what I liked and what I felt needed to be changed. And thankfully, the changes that I'm going to make are very minor, so except for one card in particular, and I can't wait for you to see that. So when I get that copy in the mail, when it arrives, I will do another video and I will do what I call comparing and contrasting the deck. So one of the things I will allude to is that I was also asked to include a title card. So the title card just basically says the Oracle of Himm, and it has Japanese kanji on it, and so the symbol represents strength. So here's the thing about that. My middle name actually has a Japanese flavor or orientation or association right now. Very interesting that Reiki is Japanese in nature, right? And what I discovered about the symbol is, or I should say my name in connection to the symbol, is that Himm, one of its meanings is that it can represent strength and upper level, right? So when I found that out, I had to have it as a tattoo. So it's another tattoo on my body. And if you were closely looking, you may have noticed that it's on the dolphin card because my arm is exposed in that picture, right? So that is another way of personalizing the deck. So the kanji has a personal association, which is why it's going to be on the title card in the deck. So that'll be another one of the cards that you'll get to see because I was told to add it after the fact. So as I wrap up, I want to thank you for sharing this space with me. I know this is probably one of my longest videos to date, but I thought it would be a nice way to kind of maybe break the ice about some of the spiritual or metaphysical concepts that have formed my spiritual practice and actually have become very integral parts of my life. So Natasha, because you are the one who asked for this and inspired this particular video, I hope you found it interesting. And if you have any other further questions about my personal brand of woo-woo, or if you're not Natasha and something that I said has sparked something that you want me to maybe elaborate on, and I will say this, elaborate on it in a way that talks about my personal experience to it, right? I am not an expert on all things spiritual or metaphysical, right? But I do have my own experience of maybe some of those things. So that will be the lens that I will be sharing from, is my own personal experience, right? So just keep that in mind if you're asking me. I don't consider myself to be a spiritual authority figure. I don't consider myself to be a spiritual teacher. I don't consider myself to be a spiritual thought leader. But as I always said when it comes to card reading, I am the expert on my experience. So that's the only place I can share from. So again, this is James Himm Mitchell. I'm wrapping up on my personal brand of woo-woo and the walkthrough of the Oracle of Himm. Again, thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Until then, take care, be well, and have an awesome day.